With respect to that, the first question that I had, I might have missed it. I was looking through because I was trying to reference some of our mixed use conversation from last month. I didn't see the minutes. Okay, so Teresa's just given me the word that we don't have those to approve today. So we will go through those next month, hopefully for both April and May. The two items on our agenda before we talk about mixed use are related to the public hearing, which is tonight for the property for the middle school property, and then it impacts that whole block. And we have a concept discussion for a multifamily housing project that's adjacent to that same block, next to the area where the cars are stored for driver's ed and whatever else is used by the school over there. So we'll talk about those two projects as part of our work session. With respect to the first item, Weston, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit of the planning considerations. We've read through the staff notes and want to make sure that we have all the context with respect to that initiative and what will be happening tonight as part of the public hearing.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chair. 1 second here. Sorry. A little bit of technical difficulties. So the property that we're looking at is the Morgan's Middle School. The school district has requested a rezone from the existing zone of R18 to CG, general commercial. There is no plans for the middle school to go anywhere. This is a merely proactive step in their part and the city's part to establish a commercial area if and when that ever occurs. It is also mutually beneficial for adjacent property owners that alleviates some buffer concerns for future development. Any concerns or questions specific that that you would like me to answer?
Well, I'd like to open it up for everyone to participate in answering that particular question. However, one that I have is this request was applied for by the school district, it looks like. And I'm just curious, I know it's saying it's a proactive request.
That's right.
But what's initiating this? Was there something that the developers on the west commercial properties there, just west of this property? That's kind of, is there a potential sale that's contingent upon this changing? Are we looking at reducing a small piece of the middle school property? So where the buses drive through, there's maybe 20 to 30 feet of grass before that bus driveway that could potentially be parceled off and sold. Is that what we're talking about here? Is we're setting the way for that, not selling the entire property to accommodate more commercial operations?
Yeah, really, it was initiated, the conversations were initiated through the city, a property owner. If you look at your staff reports, I added an image in there and highlighted in red that says adjacent properties. So the property owner there, I believe Mr. Smith, has looked at interest in extending and adding buildings into that vacant parcel that's adjacent to the Morgan Middle School, behind the old restaurant and next to the old middle school bus property, the bus building. So this is where the buffer requirement really comes in. There'd be a landscape buffer that he would have to add in that would be extensive enough that may make it difficult for him to put in any building, let alone deal with his parking concerns. So in conversations with the city and just looking at creative ways of furthering this option for them to have some level of development, it was considered that rezoning the middle school would be a good and a viable option. It still keeps the land use the same. It's still an educational institutional use. And nothing really changes up until the school ever decides to change, which is not on the horizon.
So can anyone petition for a rezone request, or does that have to be done by the property owner?
The city can petition it. It's better to have the property owner do it. You can't, we wouldn't entertain a rezone unless the property owner was on board, unless it was initiated through the city.
Okay. So in this case, there's been previous conversations likely between the city, the school district, and the Mr. Smith and his interests, prior to this happening.
Yes.
Okay.
I can probably answer that. So I've been working with Blaine on his property, and in a commercial zone, you can build up to the property line other than that buffer between another zone. So it doesn't impact any residents, the residential zone. It's kind of an arbitrary thing. So the other setbacks to the street are still intact, but just in between two commercial zones, you can build up to the property line, and he already has the bus garage on the property line. That's not compliant.
Yeah, that was my question.
This brings that into compliance, right? So every time anything that he wants to do, he's restricted because he's buffering a residential zone. And so instead of taking all these creative solutions one at a time, we just thought, well, why don't we just ask the school if they're interested? So we did. They took it to their board and they voted unanimous to just, because we were just saying, even if you just rezone part of your property, but the school district, when they discussed it, they thought, let's just do the entire parcel as commercial because it doesn't impact them, but only adds to the future options for all their property. And it looked consistent, where we would want commercial, if that's for whatever reason, if the school ever went away, it would be appropriate to have commercial from there over to 125 north. So
Ty, tell me again what options this allows Mr. Smith? What are they?
it's, well, anything that he builds, it'll allow him to build up to the property line. If not, he couldn't build up to his property line. He'd have to have like a,
That bus garage, that old bus garage is not on the property line?
it is, but it's not compliant.
It doesn't meet
So
the
it was
setback.
built there because the school used to own it.
Yeah, that's right. They own that.
Yeah, but now if he remodeled, if he did anything with that bus garage, it wouldn't, yep. Yep.
So it's more related to the existing property boundaries. There's not a proposal to purchase additional land, that 20 or 30 feet of grass before the bus lane. That's not on the table.
No, and there's no specific proposal currently, but when he did the car wash, he had to have a 25-foot buffer and a landscaping requirement. And he had to do like an agreement with the school district just for that one parcel where they put landscaping on the other side. And so every single time he tries to do something, it's going to cause a complicated agreement to make that work somehow. He doesn't have room on his side to landscape, right? So if he remodels the bus garage, it'd have to move it back. It'd have to put in landscaping where there's currently a foundation. If he does anything with the spring chicken in, like an addition, it'd have to put in landscaping where it's currently parking lot in order to, because he's buffering another zone, not actual residents, but it's our requirement because he's buffering another zone. So this just makes that entire block consistent as far as zoning. And it just removes one barrier to whatever he does. And we've got one owner, the entire stretch of that school. Yeah, one property owner, that entire stretch of the, yeah. And so he dealt with it on the car wash, but he's constantly doing improvements, reinvesting and has done a good job at as we talked about it, is like, well, instead of just trying to come up with a creative solution and, you know, trying to work around, in some ways, an arbitrary rule, because the intent of the residential zone is to protect residents. This just happens to be a residential zone, but it doesn't, the school can operate in any zone that they want. And so, so we just proposed it just to see where the school is at. And so I kind of facilitated those conversations. And that's where we're at.
It feels like a straightforward request.
Mhm.
Just from
So
what-
Ty, would notices have been sent to the other residents, say across the street of the change, notifying them?
Teresa, do you know that? If notices were sent to,
Yes.
yeah, so notices went across the street to whoever was within 300 feet.
So they'll have-
Question.
Yeah, and then we hadn't heard anything back from any of the,
Okay, but they'll have a chance for input at the public hearing for sure.
yeah, if they show up tonight, so.
Right.
And my question, I guess, is there any argument for not doing this? You know, what would be the implications that maybe we're not considering? You know, 'cause like I said, it feels straightforward. So is there a compelling planning issue or reason that would make this maybe more problematic than it looks like on the surface?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So we have started the discussion of mixed use. And part of it is going down State Street and is this piece of property, I guess what I'm saying is, should we look at it as a mixed use zoning instead of just going to commercial? Would that change the restrictions or anything on it? Would it improve for the general plan? Because I know one of the discussions is maybe changing down State Street and changing it to mixed use down there is just a question thrown out to this body.
I can address that if
Take
you'd
that,
like.
Weston,
Yes.
please.
Address, rezoning it to a mixed use wouldn't be bad. We don't have a mixed use zone to rezone it to at this time. I guess to kind of answer both your questions, as far as, is there any reason to not do it? I guess that would be if the commission feels that 10-foot landscape buffer is absolutely needed to separate any development from the middle school. And in addition to that, moving forward, it could be rezoned commercial, and we can come back later when we have a mixed use and rezone it to mixed use. That mixed use zone really should tie in well with the general plan. And as we have a tighter general plan, we can identify where the residents want to see that type of development. And that might be where it ends up. It might not, I'm not sure. So it could be a short-term solution going to commercial. And then in the long term, rezoning it again to mixed use once we have an ordinance in place that would support that.
That was my question. Thank you.
It's a great question, Wes. I like that. Now, to clarify though, there's not a mixed use zone, but there's a mixed use allowance, correct? In the historical overlay area.
That's right.
Okay. What else? Any questions? Did you guys, everyone have?
As long as we're talking. I had one question. I mean, right now there's a bus lane that runs through there, right? That runs through that property,
The bus lane runs on the school district property.
okay? And so is it east or, I mean, what direction is being developed from that bus lane?
It'd be west of the bus lane.
Okay, so there's a piece of property between the bus lane and his bus garage.
Well, right now the bus garage is right on the boundary
Okay.
of those property lines.
And so there's where the bus garage to where the bus lane is the area he's talking about?
No, he's talking about just if you look at the end on the east side of the bus garage, that's the boundary line. If you want to pull that up, Teresa, just so we can visualize it, it's also in your notes. So what we're talking about is he can't make any changes to any of those buildings or developments because he has to accommodate the buffer between commercial and residential.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so that bus garage is non-compliant because it was part of the district property and didn't have that issue until it sold. Now that the same owner owns all of those properties, if he wants to make any adjustment, he has to now comply with those setbacks.
Okay,
It limits his ability. So we're just trying to make this commercial and this commercial so that that buffering requirement is no longer impeding what's going on.
and the fact that it actually provides for more commercial is good because we're looking for more commercial growth, right?
Okay, I think that's the applicant's argument, yes. Yeah, to me, my only concern was I didn't know if we were squeezing the bus lane, similar to his question right before, but it sounds like that's not any type of pending thing. I mean, it could down the road, but not for now.
My question was just, this map now answers it for me. It looks like the other two schools are actually the residentially zoned as well, right?
Is that a question or a statement?
Statement now.
Okay. Well, when you pointing that out, it begs the question, why, why just that piece? Would it make sense to rezone the other pieces as well? And this is more on the commercial corridor. I think we can understand that, but.
So Ty, is that doing the other pieces of property that kind of tied in with the discussion? Does that work to you? Where the park,
Over here, it's already commercial,
that's already,
right here.
oh, that's, okay.
That's their garage. It looks like it's actually half and half.
The old,
It doesn't follow the property boundary.
planning building.
Yeah, and so for the school, they're allowed to operate in any zone. It's really not restrictive to theirs, but the original discussion was, would they like to maybe extend the commercial zone along the bus lane? And they felt like, let's just zone the entire thing commercial because it doesn't impact us, but it takes care of the same situation right here where you divide a property in a couple different zones and they only saw upside to it. And any potential reuse of an old school would also likely be a commercial. I mean, you can't guarantee that, but more so than the residential zone that it currently is. It would only be, right now it's zoned for single family, I believe. So doesn't leave a lot of options.
Yeah. Okay. What other questions do we have?
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So in the packet that we got from Teresa, it has the property and it's outlined in blue, but looks like the Morgan Seminary is not included in that blue line. Is that correct? Are we just looking at the middle school property only, or is it the entire rest of the block?
That is correct. It's a different property ownership. So it's just the school district property.
Thank you.
So just to add to that, again, the school is not changing, the use isn't changing, it's not going anywhere. But in the event of the school sunsetting, the school district would be in talks with the city. That would be something that would be planned out If this zone came out and the city said this isn't going to work for us for some reason, there would be plenty of opportunity for the city to work with the school, the school district in correcting that. Also, as well as changing that corner lot on the seminary, if that ever needed to change, there would be plenty of room and opportunity to change that out.
So before moving to the next item, I would just want to ask a question to some of the city staff that hopefully can weigh in on perspective. The recommendation, of course, for this particular action is to move forward with this as outlined. We're using words like being proactive, and what was the other word that stood out to me? For the future plans. It's a commercial corridor and in the center of the city, and kind of gives those, I heard, future options tonight as well. And so the question is this: I'm really trying to think about consistency with how we're making decisions and how we apply the ordinances within the city and how we entertain zoning changes. This is the second one that's come up within 2 months, and it's a reverse of the other one. So this one is to change residential to commercial. The first one was to change commercial to residential, and staff recommended both of those. So to me, there's some inconsistencies with that when I'm thinking about proactive future options. What are we trying to do? I like this commercial corridor concept. This body forwarded a positive recommendation to the city council to not change the previous commercial property to residential, and the city council voted to make that change, and now we're seeing the building go up, and it does limit the options. It becomes less proactive. When you look at that property now, it becomes a less desirable commercial space in the same commercial corridor that we're saying we want to preserve with this. So I'm getting a mixed signal on maybe what the goal is. And my fear is that, in Morgan, we don't have this town center, this, a town square like a lot of towns might have. Even our main street is only half a main street because that you've got the train on the other side. And so we don't have that. And instead of having a town center or town square, my fear is that we're having a town quilt, meaning a patchwork of we'll do what's expedient in the moment for this project, and we'll do what's expedient in the moment for that project, as opposed to taking this long-term proactive stance. And so the question is, how do we reconcile that? Because it is confusing to me as a commissioner, balancing these kinds of requests and trying to facilitate when it does feel like a mixed signal.
It's a good question. It's a good topic to discuss, Mr. Chair. In relationship to the previous zone request, what we were really looking at was about 15 or 20 feet of commercial, getting rid of about 15 to 20 feet of commercial space in lieu of multifamily. One of the things that, whether you agree or disagree, but in general, as far as the placement and where it goes, but in general, we do need rooftops to support commercial. And in the effort of moving forward with a level of mixed use, we do want to put residents and higher density residents. I shouldn't say higher density, but higher than a single family in commercial corridors. So taking away 15 feet of commercial to allow for a multifamily project next to commercial seemed like a viable option and did meet the general plan. The other part of this is, you're right, it can feel a little inconsistent. And part of that comes from we are going off of a general plan that definitely needs touching up. And so some of those decisions came based on it meets code, it meets the general plan, it meets general planning principles, and so it's a valid use. And that's part of what we have to do in our positions at times. As we update that general plan, it'll give us more clear and positive recommendations of, it is clear why we're saying this because we've already gone through the planning process. The city's very focused on what we want here, and it won't feel so piecemeal, if you will.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this may begin to show my age. But this part of town 50, 60 years ago was called South Morgan. And the little building over here where the photo business is was the South Side Grocery Store. Little later came along another grocery store. The owner,
Mr. Chair, can they speak into the mic? I can't hear hardly anything you guys are saying.
well, I guess, Wes, you'll have to get hearing aids like me.
There we go.
Okay.
But that individual opened his store over here to actually divide. And there's always been that bit of a seesaw back and forth, even in the early development of the city. And I'm not sure what to do about that. It would be nice to have a city center, but I think some of what we have to deal with has already been set in motion by folks 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I like what Weston mentioned on this. We've talked before about the growth and changing in the city, and looking forward and trying to make sure it's orderly, because we all know it's coming. And what Weston kind of said was, this is the direction that we're kind of thinking the new general plan is going to go. And I think if we're talking about a small parcel of property, that it potentially one day will increase the revenue of tax base for our little city, and it's done, orderly. I think that's the best that we could hope for as the commission to look at these things. That we're kind of, we know that we're going in the right direction, and try to make sure that we're not putting band-aids on things, and we're not doing things now that in 10 years we're all going to go, what was we thinking when we thought that was a good idea? So yeah, I like what Weston said that about this little piece of commercial.
Do you know, Nate, just another thought too, in both of these, and I think sometimes you make a decision based on what makes sense. A common denominator in both of these two changes that you talked about were we've got investors willing to contribute, capital to improve our city. That probably plays a factor in how some of the zoning goes. In other words, economics are going to drive some of what happens too.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate the additional perspective. That's helpful. The question wasn't to rehash an argument that's already on public record. It's more to understand kind of the rationale. So thank you. Any other thoughts on this before we move to our second agenda item?
I'll add my 2 cents. I'm sitting here looking at the zoning map, and I picture that bridge at the end of Young Street, and how that's going to kind of wrap things around the city, hopefully. I mean, I look at the elementary school, I look at the middle school, the newest part of it's close to 30 years old now, with many parts of it much older than that. It kind of makes me think of, you read news stories about the beloved elementary school in downtown Ogden somewhere getting torn down for commercial development. And when I look at that school that's, 30 years old, the day may come when, especially as a commercial property in Morgan, it could probably be in my lifetime where that property is going to be more valuable and a new school somewhere else rather than trying to build another new school on that same block. And as I look at, that road wrapping around over to the freeway and, the bridge over the river at the end of Young Street and potential, maybe where the elementary school is, some of this stuff, I think this is a good fit to kind of wrap that commercial around and get us tied back over to the river. So I think this is a good move. And I hope that in the future, as maybe things change, we'll maybe even be looking at this with the high school and maybe even the elementary school. I mean, the high school's brand new, and with all that, it's probably a lot farther down the road with the elementary and middle school. I mean, that could potentially even be in my lifetime. So I think this is a good move and something good to consider.
I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chair. I mean, you're correct. So it would be accessed through a 26-foot private lane. Those units, the way they're currently designed in your packet, buffer up basically right against that lane. The city ordinance doesn't permit that. Those units would have to be pushed back 25 feet if there was a sidewalk, or 30 feet without a sidewalk. There's also parking concerns as far as the ordinance requiring additional parking space that's at least a distance from the front door, and that's usually accommodated from the driveway itself. So generally, I think there's just a little bit more work that should be done and can be done on the provided plan. But this is zoned RM15, which does allow the density that they're requesting. And I think ideally would be a good project, just a matter of figuring out the layout of how it can fit.
So that's the question then, with the recommendation being to continue this item. Is it worth spending some time on it and outlining those concerns, or is the applicant well aware of what they need to come back with, and let's not spend time with this tonight, we'll just move immediately to continue this until June?
It's my understanding the applicant has received the memo from my memo and engineering's memo, and engineering also addressed the similar concern of setback from the road, as well as a few others. So it's my understanding that they do know.
Okay, because it feels like unless there's something, that we need to add to that, we don't spend a lot of time in discussing that tonight. Teresa, I saw your hand up.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I did speak with the applicant. And that lane that you're talking about right there, that the pointer is on, is not the lane that we're talking about. That's separate.
Okay.
Private lane is going to be on 127.
So it will be self-contained.
Yeah, and the reason, so I talked to Mr. Bunker today, gave him a little bit of a clarification of the staffing notes because he had a little confusion about our requirement for 25-foot driveways as well as the private lane. And so he had asked if he should be tabling or coming, and after discussion, he asked to come so that he could maybe get a few other ideas, have some questions answered, something that he could meet with the city planner and commission. So we've chose to still have him come in here and maybe shoot some other ideas as he's aware of this project.
Okay. So looking at this, thank you, Teresa. Appreciate that. Councilman London, you had your hand up too.
I have a question. The other map, just satisfy my curiosity, who owns the lane right there right now? Is that Warren?
So
Then that piece of ground, obviously to the right of that is still school district property. Yeah. So what you're saying, Teresa, that lane would not be the lane that would access the,
It would be right here.
Yeah.
So it would be
in
adjacent to
that
it.
property?
Oh, let me get this thing out.
Chair, just so you're aware, in a development review meeting, we had discussed possibly purchasing that from Mr. Welton and using that as a lane. It could create a problem for the back parcel. And the reason being is on a private lane, you're only allowed to have up to 5 units. And that will make that, I believe Warren has 2 acres. He's got property back there he would be able to develop, but we would limit him if we turned around and use that lane for this project.
We would limit the other property owner, Welton.
Mhm.
6'9".
Now, but if it's in a self-contained lane on 127, how would that limit 129?
It wouldn't. So the difference would be, what Teresa's talking about is in a development review meeting, we talked about him taking ownership of that separate lane
I see.
and including it with the project, but
Got
that's
it.
not what's being proposed right now.
So just for the fact that it won't impede him, okay, down the road. That makes sense. Is it gonna be weird to have a lane right next to a lane?
2 lanes close together.
I mean, it seems like what I would like to see is that even though the property boundary might be split down the middle, combine the thing so it's more functional.
It is something that we talked about in the development review, and they could potentially flip it and have the lane on the other side, so there's a distance.
Okay. But it does seem like it'd be more functional as is, and it still meets the legal requirement of having a private lane. Right?
Yeah. Potential imposition for the other property owner. They get maintenance agreements.
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of complicates that situation.
All right. So tell us more about the setback challenges that the applicant's been working through at Weston, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. It honestly, a lot of it is focused on the setback of the building, pushing it back 25 or 30 feet. That's the biggest thing. This is a concept plan, so it doesn't have to have exact measurements. They did provide some pretty detailed setbacks. They're close on their side and rear. For example, their side is 8.8 feet, and it's required to be 10 feet. Their rear is 25.2, and it's required to be 30 feet. So I think those are all within the parameters of them being able to figure it out. The really the big part is pushing the units back 25 to 30 feet. That's fairly significant and would change the context of the development.
Okay, so based on this drawing, what would change if they were to meet that requirement? Well, how far back would that look?
Well, those garages, my assumption, those garages are 20 feet deep, maybe a little deeper. So you could see that it'd get pushed back a little further than that. And so that obviously changes the context of what they're building and what it looks
They'd
like
almost lose half of the building structure.
Yeah.
As drawn currently.
as drawn, yes.
Okay. Now, when I drove by this, and I was just wanted to make sure I was looking at the right property. There's existing structures on this property, correct?
There is.
So those are completely coming down, or is any of that going to be retained?
My understanding is that they would be raised. They would all be down, come
Okay.
down.
All right, what insight can we help give the developer on this one as they come back with more, with a different drawing to accommodate those setbacks?
Mr. Chair, if I can go first, if I'm doing my math right here from what Weston said, it almost looks like to do a fourplex here, you're gonna end up with like a 28 by 29 footprint for each unit, and I don't really feel that's practical. Because you get that small, then it brings up issues with covered parking and all that. Having this so far off with setbacks and that, I personally don't know that I would be comfortable with approving this as a concept drawing unless we can get a little bit closer. I just don't feel that a fourplex is going to fit here. I think that's going to be extremely tough. Maybe two, probably for sure, maybe three, but I just don't see a fourplex fitting on this property.
So related to that then, maybe I missed it the first time, not maybe, I'm sure I did. The reason it's problematic to combine this development with the lane is the zoning. We can't have more than 4 on a private lane. So the city would have to take over this road and have it be a public road, not a private road. Would that solve the problem? But then there's the maintenance and ongoing. Yeah, in other words, that would use the lane and help meet the setback requirement where they didn't have to change this drawing and not challenge anything future that's behind on that flag lot of 129. I'm just curious if that's, what goes in, what's the limiting factor there?
Yeah, that existing private lane that's not a part of the development measures out to be about 24, 25 feet. It could be 26. There is the possibility of them combining and putting a full right of way in, a 60-foot right of way. If both parties wanted to do that, if they did, that would give the property owner in the back the opportunity to develop what he would like. But if we leave it just at the 26-foot lane, it would limit the development. So whatever discussions happened between the two, the submittal was just to contain the lane on the existing
Okay,
property.
so even if they decided to go into this right-of-way agreement 60 feet, that doesn't change the setback problem that we're still having, right? So
It's
that-
still
that
going to have to
problem's
be,
still there.
that's right. It's still
Okay.
going to have to be pushed back 25 to 30 feet.
Okay, so it doesn't solve anything, at least
It would
as
help.
far as
I
this
mean,
drawing. was.
Yeah, it would help as far as access, but it wouldn't change the unit.
Okay.
It may even cost them ground because in order to have that be a private street, we're going to want to turn around on the end. It's probably going to cost them more ground than what they would get away with.
Ty
Here,
has it marked out what
Yeah.
60 feet shows as.
they would have less ground to do that.
Okay, I see that. Thank you.
And the other one, I think we call it a lane, but I think it would actually function like a driveway. Like where some of the other apartments have just a little setback. So I don't know that it would be as conflicting as it seems, you know what I mean? The
Now,
proximity to the lane, yeah. But with,
Can we
Fen-
look at a
fencing or
comparison
something.
property? There's one, it's adjacent to the Riverside Park. So a little bit east of here. And it's a fourplex project, just like this one. And right there, I'm curious the dimensions here and how that fit in.
what's that?
Mr. Chair, on this one, this fourplex does have driveways and a private lane. You can't see because of the trees and et cetera. Those are all private driveways into a garage. At the time that this was built, driveways were only required to be 20 feet.
Okay.
And
So
since
the
then, we've
requirements
changed to 25 feet.
So what was the width of that, Ty? Okay, and so if we look at the other one, there's a 5 more feet requirement, it sounds like now that other property wasn't subject to.
Yeah, it's 25 with a sidewalk and 30 without.
Okay. So this is a narrower property and has that extra requirement. Yeah, I see. All right, what else?
Nate, on our recommendations, I brought this up before where my son lives in Layton. It was all approved and everything, and the builder decided to fudge a little bit on the garage. And if his full-size pickup won't even fit in the garage and shut the door, so then he's forced to park, out in where he can find parking. So one of the things I think that we really need to make sure that whatever the code is for the size of parking and these type of buildings is big enough to hold a full-size pickup, because a lot of us drive those in Morgan and everywhere else, and I can see where the parking and the lane and everything is so tight that's one thing I'd like to make sure that the plans really can show that's not going to be a problem, that somebody moves into here and they have a pickup and all of a sudden, oh, it won't fit in this garage. So now I got to find some place to park out here in front, and it's so tight, there's nowhere to park.
Is there any, thank you, Wes. That's a great point. Is there any consideration with this to have any type of restrictive covenants for this area where you can't park an RV or have something parked outside of the garage because the driveway is too short? Is there anything like that's being proposed by the developer?
I don't know if proposed by the developer, you're not able to park on in the lane. It's a fire lane as well. So
Okay.
that would be off limits, and they'd have to post no parking signs. In their driveways, they could park.
Is there a line of sight challenge? Just to Wes's point, if someone has a large pickup and you've got a kid walking down the lane, are we going to have problems with that?
Generally, it does function like a large driveway, so the line of sight would really be out to the public road.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Woods. What other planning considerations with this come to mind? Well, let's move quickly. We've got about 6 minutes before we start the session. The third item was a mixed use discussion. We had some assignments that we were going to review, and I don't remember them. So Teresa, I was hoping to see those in the minutes, and we'll catch those. But I did look back to our old assignments. There's two references to this conversation. One was in a meeting we had on October 15th of 2019. That's when we first dug deeper into this mixed use conversation. It predated all the discussion that's currently going on now with the general plan refresh. And then we referenced again last August those same assignments. We didn't take action beyond that, but those were the two meetings before last month. So we had October of 2019, August of 2020, and then April of 2021. And those assignments shifted just a little bit, but let me read back what we were looking at the time. One was we got a big map, which was good, laminated so we could draw on it and kind of propose where we wanted these mixed use ideas and projects. So that's something that we can still refer back to just as a kind of a brainstorm option. Then we had Jim. He was going to research the impact of parking with mixed use zones and kind of see what other jurisdictions have run into with mixed use and parking. David, who's no longer on the commission, and myself, we were going to review the zoning plan in particular and how to implement mixed use. Wes, and I think it's this Wes, but maybe I'm wrong, ordinance language, pictures and maps depicting mixed use areas from other cities. And we did get pictures. I think Wes Woods shared some of those. I shared some of those. We looked at them again last month. And then Sam, who's no longer involved, was beginning to draft an amendment to the city ordinance, something that we could start to work with and see if that's what we wanted to recommend. Lance was going to review the master plan and the possibilities of an area within walking distance of the fairgrounds along the trails and ideas to implement the mixed use. And George was going to research the historical aspect of developing the area moving forward. So those were our original assignments, and they evolved a little bit since then. And last month we changed that a little bit, but we still want to look at some of the language in ordinances and how this coincides with the ongoing effort to revamp our general plan to accommodate this. So when we get those notes, we can confirm what we agreed to. But until then, we can still look at some of these other jurisdictions and the language that's there. Does that sound accurate? Am I missing anything with that conversation?
Mr. Chair, in the last meeting, it was Weston was going to do some research on other cities and give us, and he actually has a PowerPoint presentation to do tonight. And then your assignment, but I only had two, and I think yours was to come into the city and go over.
So we're batting
Zoning.
500 then. We'll go through the PowerPoint. We won't do that in the work session just due to time, but if you don't mind taking us through that in the general session, that'd be great. Thank you, Weston. Anything else with that? I think we're set. We're going to start here in about 2 minutes, so we'll adjourn the work session.
For those that are on the Zoom, you'll need to close this out and go into the general session. Zoom.
Is it toasty in here? It feels toasty.